What if I told you that one of the most famous countries in human history, the land of the pyramids, the pharaohs, the Sphinx, and the Suez Canal, is almost entirely empty? Not figuratively, literally. 96% of Egypt is uninhabited desert. Almost nobody lives there. Almost nobody has ever lived there. And yet, crammed into the remaining 4%, a narrow strip of green barely visible from space, are over 110 million people. That is more than Germany, more than France, more than the United Kingdom. All of them packed into a corridor of fertile land so thin that in some places you can stand on one side and see the desert beginning on the other. This is not an accident of history. It is the result of one single geographic feature that has dictated where Egyptians live, how they eat, how their civilization rose, and how it might collapse. That feature is the Nile. And the story of Egypt is really the story of what happens when an entire civilization bets everything. Its food, its water, its cities, its economy, its future, on one river. If this kind of deep geographic story is what you're into, subscribe to Uncharted Geography right now. We cover the places and stories the rest of the world overlooks, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. To understand why Egypt looks the way it does, you need to understand the Sahara. Egypt is not a small country. It covers just over 1 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Texas and California combined, or about twice the size of Spain. But almost all of that land is desert. The Western Desert alone, which makes up about 2/3 of Egypt's total area, is part of the Sahara, the largest hot desert on the planet. It is a landscape of sand seas, gravel plains, and rocky plateaus where rainfall is not measured in inches per year, but in inches per decade. Some parts of the Western Desert have gone years without a single drop of rain. To the east, between the Nile and the Red Sea, lies the Eastern Desert, a rugged, mountainous strip of arid land that receives slightly more moisture than the West, but nowhere near enough to sustain agriculture or dense settlement. And then there is the Sinai Peninsula, the triangular wedge of land connecting Africa to Asia, which is mostly barren except for a few coastal settlements, and the mountainous interior where, according to tradition, Moses received the Ten Commandments. Together, these three deserts account for about 96% of Egypt's land area, and they are, for all practical purposes, uninhabitable. No rivers flow through them. No rain falls on them reliably. The soil, if you can call it soil, is sand, rock, and salt. You cannot farm it. You cannot graze animals on it. You can barely survive crossing it. And so for thousands of years, Egyptians have done the only rational thing. They have ignored it. The desert is there, it is enormous, and it is irrelevant to daily life for the overwhelming majority of Egyptians. What matters is the Nile. The Nile River enters Egypt from Sudan in the south and flows roughly 1,200 kilometers northward through the country before emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. Along that path, it creates a narrow band of fertile land, the Nile Valley, that ranges from just a few hundred meters wide in the south to about 20 kilometers wide in the broadest sections. Then, about 200 kilometers before it reaches the sea, the Nile fans out into a broad triangle of waterways and wetlands, the Nile Delta, which is one of the most densely populated agricultural zones on Earth. This valley and this delta are Egypt. Everything else is backdrop. The total area of farmable, livable land along the Nile is roughly 40,000 square kilometers, about 4% of the country's total area. And into this sliver of green, Egypt has packed its entire civilization. Cairo, the capital, sits right, where the valley meets the delta. It is one of the largest cities on the African continent, with a metropolitan population exceeding 20 million people. Alexandria, Egypt's second city, sits on the western edge of the delta along the Mediterranean coast. Luxor, Aswan, Asyut, Sohag, every major Egyptian city sits directly on the Nile, or within a few kilometers of it. If you fly over Egypt at night and look down, you will see one of the most striking images in all of geography. A single bright line of light, the Nile, cuts through absolute darkness from south to north. The delta glows like a fan of light at the top, and everything else, west, east, the entire Sinai, is black. It looks less like a country and more like a circuit board with a single wire running through it. This concentration of people is not a modern phenomenon. It has been this way for more than 5,000 years. The ancient Egyptians settled along the Nile for exactly the same reason modern. Egyptians lived there because the river floods, or rather, it used to flood. For thousands of years before the construction of the Aswan High Dam in the 1960s, the Nile followed an annual cycle that was the foundation of Egyptian civilization. Every summer, monsoon rains in the Ethiopian highlands would swell the Blue Nile, one of the Nile's two major tributaries, sending a massive pulse of water and nutrient-rich sediment downstream into Egypt. By late summer, the Nile would overflow its banks, flooding the valley floor and depositing a layer of dark, fertile silt across the land. When the waters receded, Egyptian farmers planted their crops in this freshly enriched soil. The harvest sustained the population, the surplus sustained the state built the pyramids, the temples, the bureaucracy, the army, all of it, every monument, every dynasty, every achievement of ancient Egypt traces back to that annual flood. The ancient Egyptians understood this completely. They called the fertile zone along the Nile Kemet, the Black Land, for the color of the rich silt deposited by the floods. And they called the desert on either side Deshret, the Red Land, for the color of the barren sand. The line between the two was not gradual. It was razor sharp. You could stand with one foot on green farmland and the other on lifeless desert. That line has barely moved in 5,000 years. If you're finding this fascinating, do Uncharted Geography a favor and hit that like button right now. It tells the algorithm to push this video to more people who care about these stories. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. The Aswan High Dam changed the Nile's relationship with Egypt in ways that are still playing out today. Completed in 1970 with Soviet engineering support, the dam created Lake Nasser, one of the largest artificial lakes in the world, and gave Egypt control over the Nile's flow for the first time in history. The annual floods stopped. Water could now be released year-round for irrigation. Hydroelectric power flowed to cities across the country. Egypt could farm multiple growing seasons instead of one. In the short term, it was a triumph. But the dam also stopped the sediment. The nutrient-rich silt that had renewed Egyptian farmland every year for millennia now settles at the bottom of Lake Nasser instead of reaching the fields. Egyptian farmers increasingly depend on chemical fertilizers to replace what the river no longer provides. The delta, which was built over thousands of years by accumulated sediment, is now eroding. The Mediterranean Sea is eating into the northern coastline because no new land is being deposited to replace what the waves take away. Some projections suggest that if sea levels rise by even 1 meter, well within the range of current climate models, a significant portion of the Nile Delta could be submerged. And the delta is where a third of Egypt's agricultural production happens. Meanwhile, Egypt's population has exploded. In 1950, Egypt had roughly 20 million people. Today it has over 110 million. That population is growing by approximately 2 million people per year. But the amount of habitable land has not grown at all. The 4% is still 4%. The Nile still flows through the same corridor it always has. The desert has not retreated. If anything, arable land is shrinking as urban sprawl, particularly around Cairo, paves over farmland to build housing for a population that simply has nowhere else to go. This creates a pressure cooker that few countries on Earth can match. Egypt's population density in the inhabited zone is roughly 2,800 people per square kilometer. For perspective, Bangladesh, often cited as the most densely populated large country on Earth, has a nationwide density of about 1,200 people per square kilometer. Within the narrow strip of land where Egyptians actually live, the density is more than double that of Bangladesh, and it is still rising. The Egyptian government knows this is unsustainable. That is why, over the past decade, Egypt has invested billions of dollars in building a new administrative capital city in the desert east of Cairo. The project, sometimes called the New Administrative Capital, is designed to pull government functions, businesses, and eventually millions of residents out of Cairo and into a purpose-built city on previously empty land. It's one of the most ambitious urban planning projects in the developing world, and it is a direct response to the geographic trap Egypt finds itself in. But building in the desert requires water, and water is the one thing Egypt cannot manufacture. The Nile provides roughly 97% of Egypt's fresh water. Almost all of it originates outside Egypt's borders, in Ethiopia, Uganda, Sudan, and the other countries of the Nile Basin. Egypt has no significant rainfall. It has no major aquifers that can sustain its current population. It is, in hydrological terms, almost entirely dependent on water that falls as rain thousands of kilometers to the south and flows downhill to the Mediterranean. This dependency has made the Nile the most geopolitically sensitive river on Earth. In 2011, Ethiopia began construction on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a massive hydroelectric project on the Blue Nile that, when fully operational, will be the largest dam in Africa. Ethiopia says the dam is essential for its own development. It needs the electricity to power its growing economy. Egypt sees the dam as an existential threat. If Ethiopia fills the dam's reservoir too quickly or withholds water during a drought, the flow of the Nile into Egypt could be significantly reduced. For a country where over 100 million people depend on a single river for virtually all their water and food production, even a modest reduction in flow could trigger a crisis. Negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan over the dam have dragged on for more than a decade without a binding agreement. Egyptian officials have, at various points, described the situation in existential terms. The geography is unforgiving. Egypt has no backup. There's no second river. There's no aquifer large enough. There's no technology that can desalinate enough seawater to replace what the Nile provides at a cost the Egyptian economy can bear. Oh, the Nile is Egypt, and Egypt is the Nile. That has been true for 5,000 years, and it is still true today. And this is what makes Egypt's geography so extraordinary and so terrifying at the same time. The same river that built one of the greatest civilizations in human history is now the single point of failure for a modern nation of 110 million people. The same narrow corridor of green that sustained pharaohs is now bursting with more humans per square kilometer than almost anywhere else on the planet. The same delta that was the breadbasket of the ancient Mediterranean is now eroding into the sea. Egypt has survived for millennia because of its geography. A single river in a vast desert created a civilization so powerful it defined the ancient world. But that same geography, the total dependence on one water source, the impossibility of expanding into the desert, the vulnerability of the delta, now creates a set of constraints that no amount of political will or engineering ambition may be able to overcome. The desert does not negotiate, the river does not compromise, and 110 million people are watching to see if the 4% can hold. If this video changed how you see Egypt, make sure you're subscribed to Uncharted Geography. We go deep on the places and stories the world overlooks, the geographic realities nobody else is covering. Hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me what country you want us to explore next, and I will see you in the next one.